come to the right spot. It's another edition of Lewis at Large. 60 minutes of smart talk radio is in your future, with guests from all walks of life and all points of view. And now, with this week's edition of Lewis at Large, here's your host, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to this segment of Lewis at Large Radio, and of course that means Smart Talk Radio is in your future. This segment, no exception, got an interesting one here. We have looked at cancer as a disease from numerous angles. Today will be a little bit different. The work is called Surviving Cancer After Surviving Cancer. It is written by Kevin L. Murphy. It is an interesting, challenging, sometimes difficult, but nonetheless comprehensive account of his family's battle with this disease. Kevin Murphy, he's currently an attorney, but he will tell you that he began, he put his way through school anyway, as a truck driver delivering the New York Times as a youth, which provided him street smarts, which undoubtedly helped him in the courtroom as well. Anyway, with that as a tough introduction, Kevin, how are you, my friend?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. The word cancer, Kevin, just that sends shockwaves through everybody. If you would share with our Lewis at Large listeners, set us up a little bit about upon hearing about this. Again, is related to your wife's disease. Tell us about the day or the period in which you found out what she was suffering from.
Well, we were newlyweds. We only been married for about 2 years, and lumps appeared in her neck, and we went to the doctor, and they said they had to be biopsied, and we held our breath for a couple of days, and the news came back. They were benign, no cancer. We went out to dinner that night, and we celebrated. Well, we became pregnant about 4 or 5 months later, and sure enough, about 3 or 4 months into the pregnancy, she had golf ball-sized lumps in her neck, and back we went to the doctor. She didn't want to go, but I cajoled and tried to force her to do it, and they had to cut her open awake because she was pregnant, and not only did we find out that it was cancer, but not too long after that first day, we found out that they had misdiagnosed the first set of lumps, and now we knew that she had cancer for at least 14, 15, 16 months unabated. And that day, when we got the news, was pretty devastating. We had 2 lives to consider, not one.
What, and again, when you say newlyweds, Kevin, at the time, were you younger?
Oh, yes, much younger.
Yeah.
I remember that day. I remember when we got the word, she just broke down, put her head in her hands, and I tried to continue the conversation with the doctor. Of course, I had many questions, but I remember just feeling numb. And, one of the things that struck me the most was they told us exactly what it is that they were going to do and the plan to attack the physical side of the disease. And then basically said, okay, come back Friday. And off we went into the parking lot with so many emotions and so much shock, but really with no manual to put in our hands on how to deal with those toxic brew of emotions that were washing down upon us immediately and were going to get worse.
And it must have felt, I'll bet, as you're walking to the car, that it was so surreal you probably don't even remember it. I remembered nothing but silence. Yeah.
Coming across the bridge from Cincinnati to northern Kentucky, and my mind started to think of all the calls I had to make. I had to break the news to her dad. I had to break the news to her mom, her siblings. I wondered how we were going to afford it. We were both just, starting out. I didn't know, of course, the number one thing in my mind was, is she going to make it? Because they told us something very, very terrible. They said there are 2 procedures to stage the disease, to tell us how far advanced the cancer was. But both of those procedures would kill the child. So they didn't know what to do in Cincy, and they wanted us to go out to Stanford University Hospital in Palo Alto, California.
Yeah.
So in Surviving Cancer After Surviving Cancer, what I do is I tell the story as we dealt with the disease and all of the steps from start to finish, and then try to give a how-to, or step-by-step approach on how to handle these emotions, to try to stay together as a couple, and to try to deal with these demons that come.
Right. And I know that the motivation here, this is not a scathing indictment of the medical community, and I don't want to make it that at all. But I am curious, looking back, what would they have done differently?
Well, they are doing a lot of things differently now. And, the forward was, I'm very humbled by the fact that the forward was done by Bernie Siegel, very famous cancer surgeon turned author. And it was just a couple of years after we went through this ordeal that his book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles, started to catch on, where he brought in a lot of things to the treatment of cancer, music, artwork, how the rooms decorated in the hospitals, bringing the family in, trying to teach the family how to lift up a cancer patient, how to teach the family how to lift up the caretaker, because the caretaker is going through their own private hell. It's very, very difficult to watch someone you love, especially a child, more so than anything, a child, to suffer, and you sit there and you can't do it. You can't take it from them. And that's especially hard for men. I wrote this book for couples, but I lean it a little bit towards men. And on the speaking trail, I've been fascinated by the fact that, just telling this story and telling the audience some of the things that I didn't do very well, I've opened up permission, if you will, to men to go seek help, to go try to lean on somebody, and telling them that it's okay. You don't have to take this on by yourself.
If you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, and in this segment we're talking to Kevin Murphy, who is an attorney in northern Kentucky. But for this discussion, we are talking about a very intense subject. That, of course, is of cancer. The work that he has created, called Surviving Cancer After Surviving Cancer. It has received numerous awards, including honorable mention at the 2012 New York Book Festival. Kevin, when you're living with cancer in a home, regardless of who it is, that word alone has an incredible stigma to it, does it not?
It's not. I'm very pleased with some of these numbers that have just recently come out in the last couple of months about how the medical profession is getting on top of the percentages, if you will, the survival rates. But it is interesting about the person who has cancer. I've had many people tell me on the speaking trail that they felt guilty about having cancer, and I looked and said, "Explain that to me. Tell me about that." She says, "Well, everybody around me is upset. I know I didn't ask for this. I know I don't deserve it. Nobody does, and I know it's not God's fault or anybody's fault. But I see everyone around me worrying about me and upset, and my husband is anxious, and he's not doing very well at work, because when he's at work, he thinks he should be with me, and when he's with me, he's worried about work." And it's crazy. It is. But sometimes cancer patients really internalize it and think that they're the reason for everybody being upset, and so communication breaks down. The flip side, the caretaker does the same thing. The caretaker doesn't want the cancer patient to think that they're suffering or they're breaking down or they're having a tough time, and so they won't speak about their feelings either. And one of the things I talk about in the book greatly is about the need to keep those lines of communication open. That's one of the things that happened with us. The line of communication shut down. The disease has a tendency to do that, and I urge people to keep the lines of communication open and to seek help.
Kevin, did you and or your wife go to sort of a group therapy things or group sessions or any kind of sort of mental health therapy of any kind as a result of this or during the period?
No, and how I wish we did. It's something that I wrote about it. The last day we were at Stanford, this date was circled on our calendar. We were going to bring our new baby home. We were going to, hopefully return to normalcy, which was a great, great mistake on my part. And on the last day she was in that radiation machine, they brought me down the hallway, and they sat me down, and there was a couple of sociologists, and there was a psychologist, and a couple of interns. And they told me a couple of things, one of which was, you haven't gone through the stages of grief, my friend. You've been the caretaker. You've been the guy flying everybody out here and making arrangements. And you better be careful about yourself. And a lot of marriages suffer as a result of cancer. We're starting to see that.
Yeah.
And I looked at them like they were crazy. Are you kidding me? We're going home. We're bringing our baby home, and everything's just in my own mind, everything's just going to be okay. And, oh, gosh, was I so wrong. And you know what? But I didn't have anybody to tell me that. And the other thing was, I was a union truck driver from New York and the son of a World War II daddy. And you don't complain, and you take care of your business, and you don't need to be moaning and groaning because nobody cares. Right. That was pounded in me as a kid. And I tried, and unfortunately, I tried to live up to that, and really nobody can. And I urge everybody that's listening to you on the male side that a real man gets help. A real man doesn't try to take this monster on by himself because she can't.
We have a lot of baby boomers listening to this show, and there's no question your situation a little bit different because of your age. At the time, but that have dealt with cancer, certainly in their parents, if not other people that they know. And one of the things that you hear often is, I never knew the toil it really took on me until it was all over. Yes.
Yeah, no question. I'll give you one example. Towards the end, at the very end, I left work in Cincinnati to drive to my home in Kentucky, which was an 8-mile drive. I realized that I had missed my exit when I was 10 miles north of Lexington, Kentucky. I had driven almost 60 miles.
Yeah.
And I pulled over, and I got very upset, wondering who was driving the car, how I might have hurt somebody, how I might have killed myself. And gosh, what a warning sign that was, that, things are out of control here. But my mind was worried about the bills. The sheriff came to serve me the papers to take our house because we had been behind on our house payments because we had to pay for a small place out in California, and small places in California are expensive.
Yes, they are.
Oh my goodness. And so, I had a million things going on, but it does take a toll, and you have to take care of yourself. Now, men, we're not inclined to sit in a circle holding hands singing Kumbaya, but you don't have to do that. You can talk. You can talk to a counselor. There are organizations out there now. That's what's different now than there were back then. There's many, many organizations out there right now where you can just go in, sit in a meeting, or just listen to other people. And a lot of the hospitals, if you ask, they'll point you to that. There are people like me. I mean, I have my email address in here, and I love receiving emails from people. Kevin at klmurphy.com. If people want to talk about what they're going through, if I can help, that's great. But it's time now for people to understand that the more the merrier to help people get through cancer, and that includes the family.
Kevin, I'm curious, and again, it's such a broad subject, but as it says in the notes that and in the book, that ultimately you and your spouse were divorced. And let's talk about that issue. How directly related was it? How was it not? And what kind of dynamic that threw into the whole thing?
Well, like I said, they warned us about it at the last, warned me about it the last day at Stanford. But, like I said, the communication started to break down at the outset. And we dealt with our fears and our emotions in very different ways, as men and women will do. I mean, it's not just cancer that does that. I mean, what's that book? Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or I might have had that backwards. I don't know, but we handle crisis differently. We handle stress differently, and with us, the number one thing that occurred was a communication breakdown, and some of those demons I talk about in the book: fear, anxiety, stress. I always considered myself a fairly peaceful man. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. I knew how to fight early. I knew how to play craps before I knew the times table. But I didn't. I always tried to walk away from it. This disease and going broke. I wrote about that in the book. Going broke, have somebody come to take my house away, having to hide my car in a neighbor's garage because the repo man was looking for it.
Yeah.
That turned me into an angry man. Not a violent man, but a man who was seething.
Yeah, pretty bitter. Yeah.
And that is not a real good thing to help keep a marriage going. And when I wrote this thing, it was a little hard to look back and see that man who thought he could handle this on his own. And it's not anything I'm proud of, but what I am proud of is that this book is actually helping people not make the same mistakes as and it took two to tango. I mean, it wasn't just me, but I could have done a few things differently, and so I hope this book will help people walk that road and come out of this with a stronger bond, and that can happen, and I want it to happen.
Again, we're with Kevin Murphy, yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, and we are talking on the tough subject of cancer. The work is called Surviving Cancer After Surviving Cancer. Again, Kevin Murphy, he's an attorney in Northern Kentucky. Kevin, I'm curious as to, and I know you are working very hard to be objective here about all of this, but from where you stood, what effect ultimately on her overall personality do you feel the battle with this disease had?
Wow, great question. I always felt that, we carried the baby. She carried the baby full term. She told the doctors in Stanford when they told her, we can't stage this disease, but we know it's at least stage 2. It's already moved to your other side of your neck and underneath your armpit. Now, we don't know if it's stage 3 or stage 4. If you try to take this baby full term, you might not see it. But we might be able to get you into the 7th month. There were so many ifs. And she looked those doctors in the eye and she said, I cannot be 70 years old and wonder if I could have saved this child. I'd rather be dead. And they all got emotional in the room and said, okay, well then we're going to save the both of you. And the baby was born, Elizabeth was born, beautiful and healthy. And by the way, she just graduated with her master's. Proud papa had to get that in. But I always felt that she thought in those early years that cancer monster was right behind her like a shadow. And having this child that she loved so dearly and that she saved, I honest to God thought that so much of the time she was wondering if this thing was going to come back and take her away from raising this daughter. And, that was, I thought, an issue on her end, and how can you blame her after the trauma of a misdiagnosis and then having to wonder if you're going to be around next month because you don't know if it's stage 4 already. And again, there's been a great deal of advancement since then, but gosh, those 5 months was like the Bataan Death March. It really was.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm curious. Let's throw it straight at you, and I know that in some ways that's the essence of this book, but how did it change you?
Well, like I said, a peaceful man became an angry man. I'll give you one for instance. I touched on it briefly. There are countless books and articles about what losing hair does to a woman. And, there's all of those shops and places, and there's lots of things that the hospitals deal with at the very outset to be able to deal with the trauma of a woman losing her hair. But nobody has really written anything that I know of about what going broke does to a man. And like I said, the comments that I've received from men when I stand up and give this speech and tell them what that felt like when that sheriff handed me that piece of paper, my wife and my brand new baby were 2,300 miles away, and I had to stay. I had to work. I had I wasn't given the time off by my employer at that time. And there he was, standing there. The sheriff had tears in his eyes because he knew what we were going through. It's a small town. And I was going to have to deal with not having a home for those two to come home to. And I became an angry man. And I had bitter, like you said. And that's a time when a man needs to sit down and have somebody help him. A pastor, a rabbi, a professional counselor if you have insurance. But, I didn't have anybody to say, hey, Murphy, you're not yourself. You're not acting like yourself. You need to get some help. I didn't have anybody to tell me that. Not that that's an excuse. It wasn't an excuse. I should have been smart enough to know it. But again, my background, how I was raised, so much of that came into it that I had to deal with this. I had to somehow carry this burden by myself. And so it changed me. Now, as the years went on and I had a chance to look at this and especially writing about it, I learned a lot. I learned that I understood that this trauma that we went through was far more severe than I ever really imagined. When you're in the middle of the forest, you don't really know. You can't see the forest from the trees, but it was an ordeal. And so many of your listeners are going through things like this. I've met parents with children that have cancer, and the divorce rate among those couples are very high, but they don't have to be.
What, and again, this subject and the word cancer, still to this day, although much less fortunately, still has sort of this stigma. Did your wife feel, or did you feel, maybe both of you felt, that suddenly became her overriding characteristic?
Well, how about this? One of the things that kind of underscores that, and again, I wrote about it in the book, was our friends, a whole bunch of people that we used to socialize with, all of a sudden stopped coming over and stopped calling. Now, why is that? Well, people don't know what to say. There are a lot of folks who can't go to a funeral home because they don't know what to say to the person who lost a loved one.
Right.
So they don't go. And that's the worst thing that you can do. And that kind of hurt us a little bit about these folks that just kind of fell off. And I look back at it now and I understand it. There are some people that, if they don't know what to say, they just don't say anything, and they try to avoid the situation so they don't feel uncomfortable. Well, what I urge people to do in the book, work colleagues, people you work with. You see those folks sometimes more than you see your own spouse. If you don't know what to say, you ring the doorbell, you come in, you hug the person, you say, I don't have the words. I don't know what to say, but I want to tell you I love you, and I want to do something for you. What can I do? Anything. Can I go to the grocery store for you? Can I take you to your appointments? Can I ease your burden? Please put me on the list. Give me some duties. Let me be a friend to you. Let me love you. And that's the greatest. Sometimes just sitting on the couch and watching a movie, there might not be any conversation for the first hour, but eventually you might be a shoulder to lean upon.
As we start to wind down here, Kevin, again, talking about I'm curious as to what your relationship is with her now and how she's doing.
Well, I will. There's a lot of good stuff in this book too. That's what I call angels, and a lot of upbeat stuff here. And let me give you one of them. On that last visit, when they walked me down that hallway and they told me about that one warning, they did tell me something else. They said, "We don't know of a single woman that has ever conceived a child with the amount of radiation we had to give your wife in her lower stomach and pelvic region, because the cancer had spread. It became stage 3. And so they said, if you want to have another child, you'll need to get on an adoption list. And so I remember going to the airport, just saying a prayer of thanksgiving that we had Elizabeth. Well, 3 years later, Kathleen Murphy was born. I remember calling up the doctor out in Stanford, Dr. Hancock, telling him that he was an uncle once again. And so, we have raised these two girls. Elizabeth just got her master's. Kathleen next week is graduating as a nurse, and her last clinical was on a cancer floor. How about that?
Yeah.
How about that? And she, she knows about her mom, knows about her mother's courage, knows about her mother saving her sister.
Right.
And so we've done a great job with these children. And let's face it, you lay down your life for another. What better love is there? So I will always admire her. I will always be so grateful to her for the courage of having these children. But it's sad, our marriage wound up in divorce, and in the book I write about the statistical data about divorces among cancer couples, and that's the purpose. That's why I wrote it. I wrote it because I want everyone out there in your listening audience who are going through a crisis to learn how to stay strong in your relationships while you're going through this.
Well, the work, again, is called Surviving Cancer After Surviving Cancer. Author Kevin L. Murphy. He's an attorney, but has put together an extraordinary read here on a very, very deep and difficult subject with tremendous candor, and we appreciate it. Kevin, before we get out of here, how can people get a copy of this thing?
It's on Amazon.com and the Barnes & Noble website. And it's in Barnes & Noble Books. And even, if you have a small bookstore, I love to support small bookstores. I've been signing in those around the country. You can, if they don't have it, you can order it. But if you're the type that buys it online, Amazon.com has it.
Well, I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing this story, and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being on your show.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.